Right. Well, my name's Bob, one of the volunteers on the bridge, and I'm going to talk to you about things that have happened on the bridge, what's under the bridge, and what's gone over the bridge. Hopefully of interest. First and foremost, the slide we've got up at the moment is the River Avon. Now, Avon is a Celtic word, Afon, also known as Afon if you're Welsh, and it means river. And 245 feet or 75 meters down below the bridge, you'll find the Bristol Avon, which is one of 5 river avons in the United Kingdom. In England. There are 3 in Scotland and 1 in Wales. So effectively, we've got the river. Our river is tidal, and in fact, it's got the second highest rise and fall in tide in the world. That's around about 15 meters, give or take a few feet, and therefore it's hard to bring a ship in and ship out. But it made the port of Bristol a very secure port, especially during medieval times. The port of Bristol is actually 6 miles inland from the mouth of the river, the Avon mouth, and closed as a commercial port in 1974. The port of Bristol is probably the second most important port in the United Kingdom for over 600 years outside of London. And as I say, up until 1974, it's a very successful port. Unfortunately, due to the costs of diverting the tidal river to create what they call the floating harbour, it did increase the costs of coming into the port of Bristol, and therefore Liverpool itself grew during this period, and the port of Bristol almost became bankrupt. If you look down to your left, next to the river is the road called the Portway. This was built in around about 1926 and was built to take traffic from the Bristol itself to the new commercial port at Avonmouth. At the time, as I say, it's the most expensive project in the United Kingdom. It had, when it was built, it was also instrumental in the knocking down of the Hotwell Spa. The railway line on the opposite side of the bridge was actually built in 1867, and that's the main railway line to take passengers from the growing town of Portishead onto the main line in Bristol. It was closed, however, by Dr. Beeching in the 1960s, and was resurrected again for the port of Bristol itself in the Royal Portbury Dock, and nowadays carries goods traffic, especially cars and vans, to the main line. Onto the Hotwell Spa, which is the picture that we've got now. All that's left now, by the way, is the building on the right-hand side, which is called the Colonnade. Originally built as a shopping centre for the Hotwell Spa. Now, in the 18th century, the spa was as popular as the hot springs in Bath, in fact. And if you wanted to cure various ailments, including rheumatism, arthritis, diabetes, scurvy, or red pimply faces, you came along to the Hotwell Spa. Unfortunately, in the 1830s, people thought it may have cured TB, and this had the effect of reducing the numbers. And anyway, bathing in the water and the seaside resorts became more popular than going to the spa. As I say, it eventually closed when the Portway was built in the 1920s. And all that's left now is the Colonnade that you see there on the right-hand side, which is now private apartments. The spa itself was moved then up to the Avon Gorge Hotel, which used to be known as the Clifton Spa Hotel, and that opened in the 1890s. And to accommodate people coming to visit the spa in the Clifton Spa Hotel, they built the Clifton Rocks Railway in around about 1898. Now, going back to the bridge, you may know that it was intended to start the bridge in the 1830s, but due to the Bristol riots, that put a hold on the building of the bridge. And the actual, they didn't start until 1836. Now, to accommodate moving men and materials from one side of the bridge to the other, they had a very 2.5 centimetre wide, 5 centimetre wide bar, which went from one side to the other, around about 300 metres. And that bar was very heavy, so consequently it sagged in the middle. But during the period where the bridge was abandoned and left, like you see it in that picture there, they had a basket. The basket, which moved men and materials on a bar, was used as a pleasure ride. So for 5 shillings, you could actually go across on the basket from one side to the other. It very often got stuck in the middle and had to be pulled from up the other side by people who would pull the basket from one side. It's said that as I say, they often got stuck, and there's no actual proof that Brunel did get stuck on his ride across on the basket. It said that he had to climb out the basket to untangle the rope. Also, very often the rope would sag, and there is a story about the basket, or the rope I should say, getting stuck on a ship's mast as it came into port. The first person actually to cross the bridge on the opening in 1864 was a young lady from Hannam. She was 21 at the time, and on the opening she decided to hitch up her skirts and run across the bridge and be the first to go from one side to the other. She actually died. She was very fit at the time. She died at the age of 94 in the 1930s. There she is. That's Mary Griffiths from Hannam. Talking about things flying over the bridge, the first plane to fly over the bridge was the Bristol box kite airplane. There's a picture of the box kite flying over the bridge before the portway was built. And this was flown by Monsieur Tetard, a French pilot. The Bristol box kite was actually made by the Bristol Aircraft Company out at Filton, a very successful aircraft company founded by Sir George White, who also owned the tram company in Bristol. This picture actually was taken by myself. It's the one you'll see in Bristol Museum, and that's the main museum in Bristol, and was built actually for those magnificent men in their flying machines. I think it was made in about 1976. Also, it said that possibly young men during the Second World War used to fly their Spitfires underneath the bridge, although there's no conclusive proof that that actually did happen. However, in 1957, Flying Officer Crosley was a pilot based at Filton Airdrome, and his particular squadron of Vampire jets was being abandoned. They were having to move from Filton. And it said that he got very upset about this and decided to borrow one of the Vampire jets and fly it underneath the bridge. Unfortunately, he encountered a crosswind and finished up slap bang into the woods and the rocks at Lee Woods. Unfortunately, that was the end of Flying Officer Crosley. Some more stories about, we tell people that come and visit the bridge, the great Zanetto. Here he is, supposedly a Japanese entertainer. Well, he was no more Japanese than I am. He's actually from a Cockney, and I know that because I actually met one of his relatives last year. She came and visited the visitor centre. Anyway, he's supposed to be a Japanese juggling group, and they were appearing at the Bristol Hippodrome at the time. It's in the 1920s. With the help of one of his colleagues, the great Zanetto, stood down where the portway is now. And one of his tricks was to catch vegetables on a fork, which he held in his mouth. And this time he got his colleague to drop turnips. Yes, turnips. And if you know the size of a turnip, very heavy turnip. And he got his colleague to drop these from the top of the bridge. And him stood 245 feet down below with a two-pronged fork in his mouth. After 8 attempts, he successfully caught one. But if you can imagine the velocity of this thing, by the time he's caught it, it's a bit like a bullet coming at you. We move on to Sarah Ann Henley. Now, she was a 24-year-old barmaid, and she had an argument with her fiance. She was due to get married, and she was so upset about this, she decided to jump from the bridge. Now, at the time, she was wearing these old Victorian crinoline waistcoats, and they acted almost like a parachute, not truly a parachute. That you can imagine the skirts coming up and floating, but she obviously went head first, I would think, and slowed her down on her fall. And she didn't actually fall in the water; she fell in the mud, where she got injured. And alive, she was screaming out, and eventually some guys came to pull her out of the mud, and she was taken to the side, and eventually on a hand cart she was taken to the Bristol Royal Infirmary. I'm pleased to say that she lived to the age of 84 and died in 1948. Something else that occurred regularly under the bridge were the paddle steamers. The Campbell paddle steamer fleet often were seen going up and down the River Avon up until the 1950s. Probably from the 1930s and the 1950s, they were taking passengers mainly from South Wales, especially on a Sunday, because the pubs are closed on a Sunday in Wales. And they would drop them off on the landing stages, which you can still see down at Hot Wells. A little bit dilapidated now, but they would come over and be dropped off on the landing stations and catch the Clifton Rocks Railway up to Clifton and then back down. Now, the reason the landing stages are where they are, and they're outside the actual port of Bristol, not because of the tidal range, the ships had to come in and turn around very quickly. And the place where you can see them, there are actually enough space for the paddle steamers to turn around. So that's the Campbell paddle steamers fleet. This is before the portway got built, and you can see there a few bicycles around. And that's a lovely picture. I just saw that this week, actually, of the paddle steamer. I think coming out of the port of Bristol. The bungee jump, the first ever bungee jump, took place on April Fool's Day, 1979. The Oxford University Dangerous Sports Club. They were wearing morning suits, top hats, as you can see there, and holding bottles of champagne. I think he's dropped his there. But last year, again, I was lucky enough to actually meet one of the members who jumped off the bridge, who's now in his 80s, and he's an Oxford Don. So that's the first ever recorded bungee jump, as I said, took place on the bridge in 1979. And by the way, it's not allowed nowadays if you fancy trying it. There's another picture looking up to the leeward side of the bungee cords. Bristol Balloon Fiesta. Something else you'll see fly over the bridge, especially in August. The Bristol Balloon Fiesta has been going on for about 40 years now. It's held in Ashton Court Estate, which is close by to on the leeward side of the bridge. If the weather is good, they try a mass attempt of balloons around about 150. If the weather conditions permit, one in early morning and one in the early evening. So you take your chance when you come to the Bristol Balloon Fiesta, what the weather's like. It hasn't been too good actually over the last couple of years. I think we probably had a 1 or 2 lifts off last year. This year, nobody's told when it was going to take place because of COVID. So they did have 1 mass attempt. I know they did, but that was kept very, very quiet until they actually had taken off. Very famous event took place in 1970, July 1970, and that was the return of the SS Great Britain. There's the other Brunel connection. A typical quiz answer question is actually how many times did the SS Great Britain go underneath the Clifton Suspension Bridge? Well, only once, and that was on its return journey in 1970, because the bridge wasn't built when it was launched in 1843. It actually left the port of Bristol in 1844, long before the bridge was built. The ship itself was left abandoned in the Falkland Islands, and it was used as a storage vessel for many years, storing coal and wool. And a campaign was put together, and Sir Jack Hayward's sponsorship allowed the ship to be brought back to the port of Bristol. In fact, it was brought back on a pontoon to Avonmouth, and then on the final leg of its journey, as you can see here in the picture, it was towed back to the port in its own capacity. I think they patched up all the holes, and you still see where all the holes were. If you go and visit the ship in the dry dock in Bristol, you can see, you can walk underneath and have a look. It was the second of Brunel's ships to be built in the port of Bristol, the first being the SS Great Western, that was built and launched in 1837. So another connections with Brunel. The SS Great Britain actually was so big they couldn't use the port of Bristol. It was actually, it used Liverpool as its home port. And finally, something that happened more recently, back in 1970, was the last flight of Concorde. Along with Toulouse, Bristol produced all the Concordes. Half were produced here, half in Toulouse. And this is the last flight of Concorde. Flew from Heathrow to Filton Airfield. And this was the last plane also to be completed from start to finish at Bristol Aircraft Company. The plane you can still go and visit. It's at the Bristol Aircraft or Aero Museum, which is open normally, except for COVID. And it's well worth going and have a look and walking on the plane, sitting in the plane. As you'll see, it's quite small inside, but excuse me, very successful at the time. And on its return flight, thousands and thousands of people there. And a lot of people will tell you that's me stood there, but not me personally, I wasn't there, but they'll tell you they're stood there near the observatory watching the plane come over. People do ask us how the picture was taken. It was actually taken from a helicopter, and you can buy the poster when you next come into the visitor centre, if we've got any left.